You little... I got you! Stop!
He's already dead!
After falling in battle, Grey Irma rises once again. Though her memory of the events that led to her defeat fades, her hunger grows. Suddenly, starve-crazed soldiers made of clay attack, but swiftly succumb to her skillful blade, and she satiates her voracious appetite upon their bones. Her hunger subsists, yet a new sensation permeates her being. A voice.
Find the sculptor.
Desperate for answers of her comrades' fates, of her past, and of her purpose, Grey Irma journeys onward beneath the ravenous light of a crimson moon. Moonscars was a game I avoided for a long time for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it was launched with a game-breaking bug that the devs openly addressed and quickly fixed. But mainly, I avoided it because I heard it was ruthless. Anytime I'd itch to play a new Metroidvania, Moonscars' gothic and impressionistic vistas always slithered to mind. Its monochromes and blood-red accents popped against its quick combat and eerie setting. And right when the game would nearly have its tendrils around me, I'd remember its scathing reviews and snap back to my senses. Moonscars is too hard. Moonscars is too unfair. Dying in Moonscars is too punishing. I'd remember these reviews and commenters' critiques and always decide to play something else. But there was just something about Moonscars that kept me coming back to it. The art, the name, I don't know. But I always came back. Well, this time, I decided to finally give it a shot. But was that a good decision? So, I guess the first thing you'll want to know is if Moonscars was too difficult and unfair. I'm surprised to say it was barely even a challenge. I was so shocked at how easy it was that I reread and rewatched its initial reviews to make sure I was remembering correctly. Surely I played the same game as the reviewers did, yeah? I wasn't long into my refreshers before I determined either reviewers were lying or they were playing a completely different game. They complained about its crushing difficulty and bemoaned the frequency of the moon hunger and the dark mirror doppelgangers as if these mechanics were constant and irritating occurrences. But I found the difficulty to be fair, and I had only encountered moon hunger and doppelgangers maybe a handful of times throughout my playthrough. So what were these liars going on about? Well, turns out we were, in fact, playing two different games. As savvy listeners may have already guessed, I played a version of Moonscars that was heavily patched. I discovered this through actual research, something I don't really do on this channel. Because the discrepancies between my and the reviewers' experiences were so vast, I looked up the patch notes. You see, Moonscars was originally released on September 22nd in the year of our Lord, 2022. Between then and the time I played it, like May or June of 2023, it had received two major updates. The devs did a few things to make the game easier. Moon hunger only happens when you die at a full spite level. Dark mirror doppelgangers only occur once per biome instead of at every dark mirror, and enemy attacks that couldn't be parried were telegraphed with a shiny new coat of paint, which in turn made parryable attacks easier to spot. Of course, they did other things like rebalanced bosses and made super armor disappear permanently after being struck with a witchery, but by and large, the big game changers were the updates to the Moonhunger and the doppelgangers. Of the complaints I remembered reviewers whining about, these were their biggest. Okay, it's time I take a step back. I realize I've said a bunch of jargon that might have you scratching your head. And that's okay because I swear I'm going to get into all of it. But first, I wanted to get across how much of a difference playing a game at launch versus playing a game months later can be. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is up to you. What I'm saying is if you were like me and was deterred from playing Moonscars because of its initial reviews, you might want to hang around to listen to what I have to say. Because post-patch Moonscars is a completely different beast. A defanged, declawed, domesticated beast. But a beast that's been refined to be the best beast it can be. God, this metaphor's gone all to hell. Let's just move on. Let's get that jargon I was spitting out earlier all sorted. To do that, let's set the scene. Moonscars is a Souls...
Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it.
Vania.
Nice.
I think I've used the term on my channel before. I think I've even analyzed one in the past. Oh, there's one in the card up top right now. How convenient. Maybe you should check it out after this video. Anyway, for the uninitiated, which definitely isn't my brilliant subscribers, but I'll lay it out anyway. A Soulsvania is a Metroidvania mixed with elements from Dark Souls. These elements include, but aren't limited to, currency that doubles as EXP, save points that restore you and resurrect enemies, and punishment upon death, typically referred to as corpse running. With that established, I should be able to get you all caught up on the jargon real quick. The currency is called bone powder, the bonfires, i.e. save points, are called dark mirrors, and there's corpse running, but death is far more punishing here than in any other Soulsvania I've ever played. Dying in Moonscars has the potential to suck extra hard because of a couple mechanics I mentioned earlier, Spite and Moon Hunger. Spite's weird because it's really a roguelike mechanic that's been duct taped into a Metroidvania. As you kill enemies, your Spite level increases to a max of 5 levels. With each level, you get a random bonus you can add to your character, like adding crit chance or making your healing more potent. It's odd to be given 5 random buffs as you play, and frustrating when you lose all these buffs upon death and have to earn them all back. Worse yet, if you die at max Spite level, you trigger Moon Hunger. In the game's original build, Moon Hunger triggered every time you died, so I can see how that'd get annoying. Let me explain. During Moon Hunger, the moon turns red and all enemies become twice as difficult to kill. This can be a hassle or it could be a boon, depending on how you look at it. During Moon Hunger, bone powder dropped by enemies is increased, and a special item called Exquisite Earrings can only be found during this time, so there's some risk reward to it. Unfortunately, if you're not in the mood to deal with tanky enemies who hit like a truck, the only ways to alleviate the hunger is to either defeat a boss, of which there are only 6 and one is used twice, or give the moon a gland at one of the dark mirrors. This sucks because glands are rare, so you really don't want to use them if you don't have to, especially because there's a merchant who trades glands for sweet accessories. Man, here I am bringing up merchants and accessories. I feel like I'm all over the place with this analysis. Let's take another step back and talk about the dark mirrors. As stated earlier, dark mirrors are this game's bonfires. Along with healing you and resurrecting enemies, you can exchange glands to do stuff like alleviate moon hunger and bone powder to purchase witcheries, which is this game's magic. There's a ton of witcheries to purchase, you can equip 2 at a time, and each witchery has 3 levels. I didn't use a ton of them because I'm an up close and personal fighter, but some were indispensable. A witchery called Stone Pillars pretty much washes all aerial enemies, and a witchery that summons your own doppelganger breaks the game, so I highly recommend getting it. Speaking of doppelgangers, there's a cursed dark mirror in each biome that essentially kills you upon activating it, leaving your dead corpse to rise and fight you when you return to the mirror later. Narratively, what actually happens is you transfer your consciousness to another vessel, and the former vessel must be slain lest it becomes cleft. And there I go using cleft. Man, there really is a ton of jargon in this game, isn't there? I'm not gonna lie, I had nearly completed the entire game before I figured out what being cleft meant. I finally figured it out once I got brave enough to sell those memory molds. Damn, more jargon. This might be my toughest Metroidvania to analyze to date. How'd I know it'd be a Soulsvania that'd break me? Okay, let's move on to cleft and memory molds. Another thing dark mirrors do is open fast travel between them. One of the locations you can travel to is a hub area called the Mold Workshop. I don't want to dive too deeply into the story, but here you can speak to NPCs you meet along your journey, a few of which play the part of merchant. One of these merchants will buy memory molds from you. These are items you get at important junctions in the game, like after a boss fight or after a revelation or story beat. I don't really know what they are, but I presume they're tangible as they can be sold. Anyway, selling these molds not only nets you some bone powder, but it also grants you lore. And because I absolutely refused to sell any of them until the very end of the game, because I thought maybe if I kept them all, I could unlock a secret ending. Oh, sweet summer child, how naive you were. I was so confused about much of what was going on. I eventually sold a mold that finally explained what being cleft meant. I'll give you a quick rundown. In this world, humans live because they have a gland that produces ichor. Some dude named the Sculptor creates living clay people and gives them a fake gland that produces ichor. But over time, these fake glands crack or become cleft. And when this happens, the clay people go insane and try to eat humans' bones. So, if you're a clay person and someone calls you cleft, it means your gland is busted, you've gone crazy, and you're trying to eat people's bones. It would have been nice to have known this much earlier in the game, but because my stupid OCD wouldn't let me sell the molds, I learned about essential elements to the plot way later than I had to. I guess the moral to this story is just sell the molds. Don't be stupid and keep them like I did. Hit me up in the comments if you held onto the molds for too long. I can't be the only one. Wow, this has got to be a first. We're already pretty deep into the analysis, and I haven't even brought up combat yet. I guess now's as good a time as any. Combat feels great. Beyond the witcheries I've mentioned, you have a 3-hit combo that's quick, a speedy dodge with iframes, a randomized special move you gain via your spite level and lose whenever you activate a cursed dark mirror, and a parry. That's really it for the basics. Moonscar takes the easy to pick up, hard to master approach, and it works for 2 reasons. 1, combat is fast, and 2, the enemies are brutal. 95% of the enemies are aggressive and have tells that telegraph their attacks. Side note, most of these tells were implemented with a post-launch patch, a definite improvement I'd imagine. Learning and mastering each enemy's attacks was highly rewarding. It was such a great feeling to run into a mob and parry riposte everything they threw at me. And there was a lot of environmental hazards you could use to your advantage as well. Spike traps could be triggered to impale jabronis, lumps of clay could be molded to create soldiers to fight alongside you, and corpses could be exploded for some reason. Obviously, all of these hazards could be used against you as well, so you were constantly kept on your toes and forced to be observant if you wanted to gain the upper hand in combat. You also have an Ichor meter, which is the game's mana or MP. It's accumulated by attacking enemies and can be used to proc witcheries or to heal yourself. I loved this healing mechanic because it was essentially a 1-for-1 exchange. The longer you hold the button to heal, the more Ichor would drain and the more HP you'd get back. It was nearly instant and you could stop healing at any time. There was little commitment to healing and it kept battles speedy and intense because bosses didn't need to have lulls in their attack patterns so players could heal. Instead, you can heal whenever for however long you wanted, but the boss's onslaught stayed relentless, so you had to be careful. It was a pretty cool balance. As far as traversal abilities go, Grey Irma pretty much has all she needs from the very beginning. There's no double jump, but she can wall climb and air dash out the gate. She eventually gets a super dash and the ability to open fleshy walls, so there is ability gating, but movement options for combat never increase. Again, easy to pick up, hard to master. The game's challenge comes from the enemies and learning their patterns. Unfortunately, there aren't that many enemies in the game, maybe 20, and it isn't long before they start getting recycled. It's a bummer because part of the thrill of entering a new biome are the enemy encounters. What does this new enemy have to offer? What does the placement of this enemy mean for the lore? You don't get that in Moonscars. You see all the enemies the game has to offer around mid-game. They're still fun to fight as the combat is so good all around, but more enemy types would have been nice. If not for the game's relatively short length, like 9 hours or so, I could see this lack of enemy variety being more of an issue than it is. The small variety of bosses on offer are pretty cool. They were challenging and I liked their designs. I don't really have a lot to say about them as they weren't that memorable, aside from the cleft baby you have to fight, but they typically were solid roadblocks. I'll tell you this, if you do find this game to be difficult, the devs created some accessories you can equip that basically enable easy mode. One accessory negates damage to an incredible degree at the cost of movement speed, and another makes you completely invulnerable while you're healing. That latter accessory genuinely breaks the game and raises a very serious question. Why put these accessories in the game? I've heard arguments that adding these crutches showcases the devs' lack of technical skill. Instead of making a fair and balanced game, they instead threw in these accessories to do the balancing for them. I don't agree with that. Equipping these accessories is optional, and I was able to complete the game without them. You'll never hear me complain about optional content, especially for the sake of accessibility, which is why I think these items were added. I guess the takeaway here is this game can be challenging, but you shouldn't let that stop you from playing it because the devs have your back. They added these items because they want you to finish their game, and I can respect that. However, sometimes devs can take accessibility too far to where it negatively affects more seasoned gamers' experience. Case in point, the in-game map. The map displays icons showing exactly where to use the super dash and where to open flesh walls, Moonscar's gatekeeping abilities. I don't like handholding like this because it takes away the thrill of exploration. Getting lost is part of the fun of MVs. If there were a toggle for these icons, I wouldn't make such a big deal out of it. Apparently, the first version of the game didn't display where to use these abilities, and critics got too confused on where to go next. I think it's fine to listen to your audience and give them what they want, but I think the devs gave up too much ground here because what they did originally to guide players on where to go next was brilliant. Here's an example, using the super dash to cross chasms. After the patch, as stated earlier, an icon appears on the map to tell you where to use the super dash, but the devs already dropped a hint. At locations where you need to use the super dash, a ghostly apparition of the fallen comrade who gave you the super dash awaits. Not only was that helpful guidance, but it was amazing storytelling. Adding in the icons lessens the apparition's impact. Let's talk a little about Grey Irma, shall we? Specifically, let's talk about how to customize and level her up. As mentioned earlier, you use bone powder to buy witcheries and accessories to make her stronger. Unfortunately, there's no other gear in the game, which is always a letdown, and there aren't stats like strength and dex to worry about. All Moonscars has are hidden HP, Ichor, and damage increasing upgrades to find in each biome. A lack of gear always puts a damper on exploration, but I still had a good time exploring Moonscar's map. They kept things interesting by throwing odd NPCs at you with weird side quests, as well as teasing you with that weird Cheshire Cat dupe and that creepy little girl. They were always just out of reach or in unexpected areas and always dispensed obtuse ramblings to confuse you. I found their presence throughout the journey to be fun and kind of comforting. This may surprise listeners, but I hate the feeling of isolation in video games. That sounds odd coming from an MV pro, but it's true. So whenever an MV does something to make me feel less lonely, I appreciate it, even if it is just a disrespectful cat and a creepy little girl. Continuing with exploration, the biomes themselves were nothing to write home about. Most were just dilapidated castle areas depicted in blacks, whites, and grays. Backgrounds looked as if they were painted with smeared brushstrokes, and everything just blended together after so long. I'm not saying I didn't like the game's art direction, it just wasn't my favorite, and I can see it turning some people off. There was a mid to late game biome I thought looked beautiful because it utilized natural lighting effects. It was an interesting contrast to the rest of the game and was found in a very unexpected region. I love stuff like that in MVs. As far as backtracking goes, it wasn't really necessary as long as you explored thoroughly. Combat is the main attraction in Moonscars, so typically you could find everything of interest during your first go in a biome. But if you do have to backtrack, you have the dark mirrors you can use to fast travel, so that's great. As far as atmosphere goes, it's exactly what you'd presume just by looking at a screenshot. And knowing it's a Soulsvania solidifies any preconceived notions. It's dark, angsty, and brutal. The tried and true trope of exploring a ravaged kingdom after some apocalyptic event is in full force, and I'm here for it. I get this is a tired cliche, but I don't care. Give me more, please. The game's impressionistic art style, I'm not an art guy, so I had to Google that word, mixes well with the game's depressing and oppressive tone, and the cat and little girl's odd behaviors somehow just make everything feel more other. There's a noticeable lack of music, mainly ambient sounds, but it works. It made the hollow halls feel just that much more hollow, and made the epic boss music that much more epic. And the little bit of voice acting they had was fine, neither good nor bad. Maybe a little corny, but I'm down for that. Overall, I enjoyed my time in Moonscar's decrepit kingdom. Let's talk narrative. Unfortunately, it didn't grip me the way I expected it to, but that was largely my fault because I didn't sell those stupid molds to get that sweet, sweet lore. Playing through the game without any of the mold's explanations left me feeling kinda lost. I told you about how confused I was with cleft or the cleaving, but then they throw out words like sublunary world, pristine, integral vessel, and way too much talk about glands. I was able to piece together that Grey Irma was part of an elite group of 8 soldiers designed to kill Clayborn monsters, and I also gathered that she was the only survivor of this group, which you'll discover is incorrect. Turns out the elite group comprised 4 humans and their clay counterparts, and the clay warriors had become cleft and turned on their human parents, who they were molded after. Apparently, the sculptor, who's like the god of this world but actually is just a dude with special alchemical knowledge, fed the humans and their clay counterparts in this elite group different information because he wanted them to kill each other, and the Clayborn victor would be something called the integral vessel, and this integral vessel would unite all Clayborn under a single consciousness so they could be controlled and ordered to stop eating human bones? I think I got the gist of it. There's more twists and turns to this elite group schism that I'm trying not to spoil, but it's all kinda dumb and convoluted. It worked well enough to keep the action moving. I mean, I can't say I wasn't interested in the plot throughout my playthrough. I'm not gonna say I fully understood Moonscar's plot and themes though. For instance, there was this interesting theme about the inevitability of parents being overtaken by their children, with humans being killed by their superior clay counterparts serving as an allegory for this. This was also reinforced with how Grey Irma would shed her previous clay body and then slay it with her new body. There was also this interesting angle around how it was impossible for humans to live with a perfect reflection of themselves in their clay counterparts without succumbing to their desire to destroy it. Perhaps because their Clayborn clones highlighted their parents' weakness and flaws? Then there was this event called the Black Spring that wiped out all the children in the kingdom and left all the adults infertile. Thus the reason why they needed to make clay people to survive. Then there was this whole thing about how the Earth and the Moon were fighting, the Earth being the mother/parent to the Moon. Lots of parent versus child themes are going on here. I didn't really understand what Moonscars was trying to say with it all though. Perhaps it's just the old From Software / Soulsvania conceit that the new guard must replace the old guard, and the futility of delaying this passing of the torch only results in death, decay, and rot. Yeah, that sounds right, probably. As much as I liked the narrative once I understood it, Moonscars still let me down with its lack of multiple endings. And it's a shame because they definitely had a perfect setup for a true ending. Even though the sculptor wasn't a real god, there was definitely a supernatural entity pulling the strings in the background. The Moon Goddess. I don't believe they had a satisfactory end to that part of the story. I guess I could be wrong, as one of the last bosses basically merges with the moon as you fight it, but was this merge the actual goddess, or just a fraction of her power? With ambiguity like that, you know you got room for a true ending. But I believe they went with the "we'll leave it for the sequel" route, which I guess is okay, though I'd rather have multiple endings and a sequel, but whatever. Some of the side quests led me to believe I was working toward a true ending as well. The most notable being the one where you take a lump of clay to the Great Kiln, the place where all Clayborn were annealed, and literally make a baby. I was like, dude, this baby's gonna save the world somehow. Maybe it'll be the bridge between the humans and the Clayborn and bring about peace. Or the baby is the integral vessel, and we must raise it to be just and kind, so it'll use its control over the Clayborn to save humanity. Or the Moon Goddess will see that even the most innocent of creations can be wrought in such desperate times, and she'll relent. No. None of that. You give the baby to an old lady, and she gives you like 3 glands, and I had already had 50 at this point. I was so disappointed. So, yeah, no true ending. And the ending on offer is kinda meh. I didn't really understand it or find it particularly satisfying, but whatever, at least the game was fun. Despite being let down by some things, Moonscars exceeded my expectations. I went in thinking I was about to ride the struggle bus all the way to Anne Orlando, but instead it felt like taking a minecart to Donkey Kong Country. Still challenging, but not overbearing. I cannot believe how different my experience was compared to early adopters. I can see why many of these initial reviewers didn't like Moonscars at launch, but I can say the game nowadays is far more manageable and pretty dang fun. The post-launch patches toned down some of the more frustrating mechanics and made the game more accessible to a wider range of gamers. With its unique art direction, fun, fast, and rewarding combat, interesting plot, and mindfulness for the player experience, I recommend Moonscars. Maybe don't push it to the top of your MV list unless you want a more combat-focused experience, but definitely put it on the list. I think it's a good, battle-focused Metroidvania for all MV fans, vets and newcomers alike. It may not be flawless, but you'd have to be cleft to pass up this wonderfully macabre game. God, that's a terrible ending. Can we cut that out?